In America, we teach our children to look up to their heroes. These heroes come from some of the most elite special forces units in the U.S. military. Every day, they put their lives on the line to keep America safe. But unfortunately, our military leaders don't always have their back. Currently, there are 3 Special Forces heroes in the crosshairs, facing serious criminal charges for a crime they did not commit.
It's really inconsistent with the story that was being told by the command, or still is being told by the command. 3 MARSOC raiders were given authorization to go out in town on New Year's Eve. And this is in Erbil, Iraq. And you have to understand, this is not like a typical combat zone. This is actually a relatively safe environment. So there is a lot of socializing that's going on off base. And they're confronted by a separate contractor who is a former Special Forces operator. And apparently there's some confrontation about whether or not these active duty guys were showing enough respect to them. And, it seemed like a nothing situation, but it quickly escalated to where the contractor confronted Eric Gilman, the Special Operations Independent Duty Corpsman, and it got so heated that the security there had to remove this contractor and have him leave the facility. This is not really a he said situation. The problem for the government is that this is actually captured on video. So all of this is out here. It's not, speculation and witness testimony. Like, we see all this very clearly. And as this contractor's leaving, he turns back and yells at the chief, like, hey, I'm going to kick your ass when you come out here, and then goes outside and decides to wait.
Waiting for these 3 Marines to come out. And as soon as they did, what had happened is Mr. Rodriguez escalated verbally, insulting these Marines.
They're not upset at all by this. They're like, fine, we'll wait till the guy leaves. But eventually, when these 3 raiders leave and they're walking down to their car, they have to pass by where this contractor is hanging out with his buddies, talking about how he's planning on escalating the situation. Well, Gunnery Sergeant Danny Drawer says, we're on the same team where there's this conflict. Eric stays aside while he goes over to talk to the contractor. And while he's sitting there talking to him, trying to say, look, there's no reason for all this happening, the contractor is yelling at him. He's in his face trying to get a rise at Danny. And Danny's like, look, that's not going to happen. Let's just calm down.
Continued to challenge, verbally insult, put his hands multiple times.
Well, first he pokes Danny in the chest, then makes a sudden movement towards Danny. Danny pushes him back, and you see him step back, and he doesn't even follow up with any sort of offensive, aggressive moves, just pushes the contractor back. The contractor comes at Danny, hits him once in the face, a second time, and before he can land a 3rd blow, Gunnery Sergeant Josh Negron jumps in, pushes Danny out of the way, and with one punch, just one, the Raiders are like saying, stop. There's no reason for a fight here. Let's stop. And they get the whole situation under control. Nobody hits this contractor after he goes down, which again, this was a part of the false narrative that came out afterwards.
After 2 separate investigations, in Article 15 and Article 32, you have the prosecution trying to use conjecture and hearsay, trying to develop a fake news story that these 3 Marine Special Operators curb stomped someone. Completely false. This was captured on video camera. Very clear. That camera is incontrovertible.
And they end up picking this individual up, put him in the vehicle, in the Raiders' vehicle, and they take him back to base, and they set him down, and they care for him as best they can.
And upon them reporting it to their leadership, we had the leadership saying, make sure Mr. Rodriguez is seen by Chief Gilman, who was already treating him from the scene all the way back to the base, where the care continued, and he observed him until they put a watch on him until they were medically evacuated to Germany.
Now, the situation ends up turning horribly bad in that he ends up asphyxiating. He ends up choking on his own vomit. And when this happens, the Raiders end up taking him to be cared for at a special medical facility. He ended up being medevaced up to Lamstuhl, Germany, up to a big medical facility. And unfortunately, 4 days later, he died. And very tragic. There's nothing, nobody's celebrating this. There's no like, hey, Raiders versus Special Forces, none of that. This is a very tragic situation that never should have occurred. But the real key point here is that these Raiders acted responsibly. They tried to avoid a confrontation. They listened to the security guys when they said, hey, do not follow these guys out. They didn't. When they went out, they didn't go after them in an aggressive manner. As a matter of fact, you can see, again, all of this is on video, that when they go to discuss this, to try to de-escalate, Josh LeGrone has his hands in his pocket. Danny has his hands down by his side. They're trying to discuss this, but there was no discussion to be had. And then when finally the situation escalates, that they use the minimum amount of force necessary to stop the confrontation. There weren't multiple blows, kicks, punches, none of that. Again, all of this is on video. This is not something where we're making up a story. You can see it all on video. And that's just, everything about this is a bad situation that was handled as best as possible by these Raiders, and now they're being charged with manslaughter.
Now, willfully, the commanding general wants to hold someone accountable. You have a dead contractor, you have a command bent on pushing this where it's going to a general court-martial this summer, as these men have been assigned. So the situation really reminds me of what happened in our case, where an incident happened in combat in Afghanistan, false allegations saying there was mass murder. There must be accountability. The problem here is in this closed-loop system that we have in Marine Special Operations Command, the commanding general, who is the convening authority in this general court-martial, he is the one who assigns, ultimately, whether people are retained, promoted, where they'll be assigned next. So this jury pool is tainted. When you have a conviction rate of 98%, you're going to get an outcome of what the boss wants. And the boss, he could have ended this in Article 15 or Article 32, and went both past those and have a video showing exactly what happened, which has been dismissed. That's why we're asking everyone to call their congressmen and urge them to examine this case and have this case dismissed as it should be.
In America, a part of our due process is that we have the whole presumption of innocence, so that somebody goes into a trial, that there should be a presumption that they did not do it. The government has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's a few things that are setting up already for failure, in that these guys already were taken out of their jobs, their security clearance were pulled, their special duty pay was pulled. So all of a sudden they're already being punished and being treated as if they're guilty. And the entire command sees that those guys are being treated as guilty. And so when all of a sudden they go to court-martial, well, who's going to be that jury of peers? These people that already perceive them as guilty. Because if they weren't guilty, then number one, why were they pulled from their jobs? Number two, why would they be going to a court-martial? A lot of people in the military think if you go to court-martial, you're going because you are guilty. They don't realize that the whole purpose of court-martial is to determine guilt or innocence. And that's why we see a 98% conviction rate out of court-martials. And I think the only other place where you see a higher conviction rate is in China, where you have like a totalitarian regime. So here, all of a sudden, these guys are going into a court-martial with the presumption of guilt.
Of the three types of court-martials that there are, summary, special, general, General Yu, the commanding general, chose the highest form of punishment to send this to a general court-martial with the allegations of manslaughter, the max punishment being death, and could be. That is what is making this so outrageous. He had a Marine defend one of his other fellow Marines being assaulted with one punch, and now, after two other prior investigations, the general has decided to send this to the most severe form of court-martial. That is why we're asking you to contact your congressman and have this case immediately dismissed.
This case cannot go to trial. because the likelihood of this case coming out as anything but guilty, even when the evidence, the videos show that they acted in self-defense and defense of others, they're going to end up going to Leavenworth for wrongful allegations and unjust convictions.
These men's lives rest in the hands of the American people. As the saying goes, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And that is why we are asking for the American public to contact their congressman at congress.gov and urge them that this case must be dismissed.
These men swore an oath to defend our nation. Now we ask you to rise up and support their defense against this unlawful command influence and outrageous charges.